1:03. Welcome everyone. I'm glad if you were able to make it. I know, oh, there's a bunch of people signing in right now. It's getting harder and harder to do Zoom classes, honestly, but it's nice to see those of you who are here. Today we're doing a special Purim class, of course. Purim is coming up this weekend. Personally, I have very mixed feelings about holidays that are not Yamim Tovim, meaning they're not, there are days that you could drive and you could do other things. I always find that it's just that weird in between feeling where it is a holiday, but it's not. And because we could drive, it feels hectic, where we're running around, we're trying to do errands, we're trying to live our regular life. But we're also in this festive mode. Living in a large community, it also brings other issues with it that have to do with, we do Mishloach Manot, which is beautiful and nice, but the pressure, even during a pandemic, around giving and who are you giving and do you have a nice, Mishloach Manot, and is it pretty enough, and the comparison. I do feel like there are a lot of dimensions to the holiday which pose difficulties. That said, I think one of the most interesting, just a quick announcement. Rachel, do you want to make the announcement yourself? Novik, are you there? You're muted if you want to.
Yes. So this Saturday night, Sephardic Synagogue is having an auction and a separate Zoom event. The auction is live from today, so you're going to be seeing a lot of media about it. Sephardic events. I'm going to be sending things out. I worked very hard on this auction. It's beautiful. Please put in for it, and it's a great cause. The shul really needs the money, and that's it. And if you'd like to join the Zoom event, that will be on Saturday night as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, we wish you success with that. So. One of my big questions that I ask about Purim is the idea of reading the Megillah. I don't know that there's another time. I mean, listen, we have many holidays. We're supposed to go to shul every week and listen to the Sefer Torah, but this directive that every man, woman, and child hear every single word of the Megillah from beginning to end, uninterrupted, twice. That's very intense. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot to do. And what I love, again, about Judaism are, these little details, right? Which is that when we're reading the Megillah, we're not reading it out of a book or anything like that. We're reading it out of a scroll that we have this, there's a certain way that they fold it so that it looks like an official letter or a scroll. So that you almost feel, this sense that you're back in Persia and there's a royal proclamation and they're reading from it. And we're all, the men are holding their own little mini scrolls and we're moving through the text and we're listening to it. So the big question that you have to ask is why? Why was it so, and I don't see, today there are not a lot of cameras on. I don't know if anybody's going to participate with me. So I'm going to be asking questions. If you get in the mood to answer, I'd love to hear from you. But one of my main questions is, why do we think that it was so significant for the rabbis to have this insistence upon hearing the Purim story read out loud? As a follow-up, we know, or if you don't know, just a reminder that there's also a very interesting thing that Rambam says, Maimonides says, where he believes that all of the holidays eventually in the time, like in messianic times, will disappear to a degree, or we won't need them. But Purim will, like the persistence of Purim. So we have the idea, the insistence on the public reading of the text and the hearing of every word, and also this other idea of even if every other holiday maybe goes away, Purim will always survive and always persist. Any thoughts on either of those issues? Anybody willing to weigh in with me?
Esther, do I have to put my camera on if I'm listening?
No, you don't have to put your, guys, you don't have to put your camera on to participate. Yeah, no, you don't have to put your camera on.
So I just think on the face of it, Purim is just a holiday where God's face is not present, and it's really about men's and women's determination to make something happen, make something change and work for the benefit of Klal Yisrael and for the benefit of mankind, not just like a personal benefit, but like for the benefit of a whole. So when someone sees something that's terrible about to happen, it's not about saying, oh God, you step in. It's like when Esther says, when Mordechai says to Esther, if you don't step in, salvation is going to come from somewhere else.
Right. And that imperative being necessary for everyone, and a permanent imperative, one that doesn't go away.
Right.
Any other, does everybody agree? Does anybody have any other thought on this?
I don't feel like it's about like men being in control. I feel like the Megillah is a move from God doing miracles out in the open, and us seeing him in these grandeur gestures and in these like major experiences, to him doing things quietly, because that is how we experience him in Galut, without, the Mishkan, and without being in Israel, without prophecy being readily available. And so that is the experience that has carried forth since that time. And that's how we have to interact with him now.
Yeah. So I think both answers are dead on and accurate. And I think we would all agree to them that let's locate our thoughts for a minute. Let's really zero in and own it, especially before the holiday, which is two important points. One, we all know that there is no mention of God's name, or even of the miraculous overtly. There's no overt miracles in Megillat Esther, right? This is even her name, Esther, there's always that rhyming with the concept of Hesed Panim, of the hidden face of God. You can't avoid thinking about that connection when you hear her name. Even her story, which is about being in hiding, where she's taken, she has this other name, Hadassah, but it's not revealed to anyone. Actually, it's never spoken of again. She has this other identity of Esther. Esther is a Persian name, which is connected to Ishtar, and Mordechai, of course, connected to Marduk, which are the two main Persian gods, God and goddess. But you see the punning and the twisting of the narrative, where it's going to take a Persian name like Esther, but it's going to hint to the Hebrew language of the hidden, right, of that which is hidden, and it's going to hide her Jewish identity. And a lot of it is going to be about how do you exert influence? How do you find your voice and power? How do you move? How do you shift the momentum of this world in a very subtle and hidden and not overt way? The idea that every single Jewish man, woman, and child has to listen, but can't just listen. It's this idea of you have to listen carefully. Don't miss a word. For me, is really, I'm going to get, my passionate here. I'm going to get a little passionate here and say, I've always told people, somebody once told me, oh, I hear you're teaching Torah classes, so you're over the Shakespeare thing. I got really upset because I never understand how anyone who's really a dedicated Jew doesn't know that all intense Jews are also intense readers. And it's not just any type of reader. We're readers of text. We're trained in it from when we're born. Every week we have to learn a piece of text, and we're never told, take it at face value. Believe it is what it is, and there's no depth to it. It's always, are you looking deeper? Are you understanding all the nuances? We're trying to listen to a prophetic message in a piece of writing. That's what we do from when we're babies, right? So it's natural for someone as a Jew to be very interested in textual analysis, in the way we read and the way we understand things. And here comes on Purim this directive: don't miss a word. Don't pay attention to the story. Pay attention to the plot line, because if you're paying close attention, you're going to be able to tease out these nuances. And your survival, and here comes Maimonides saying, no matter what, we're always going to have Purim. Your survival as the Jewish people is going to very much depend on your ability to read a situation correctly, to see the subtleties of the world you're living in, to look for those big and small patterns, and think about how do you insert yourself into it. And it's not usually going to be that we insert ourselves as a hammer, right? We're not coming in loud and big and strong. We're always going to come in with a degree of subtlety, with, you know what, I'm going to throw two parties, not one. You know what, I'm going to ask for it a certain way. I'm going to ask Haman to come and Achashverosh to come to the party. And then Achashverosh becomes very skeptical, and he starts looking at Haman differently. And Haman becomes the guy, and because, Achashverosh gets so upset from the first party that Esther throws, because she gets in his brain, and then he can't sleep that night. And when he can't sleep, he's like, read me from that book. Of course, what does he read? He reads about Mordechai. Haman happens to be coming to talk to him about the tree, right? He's coming to talk to him about how he wants to kill Mordechai. And then he says, what would you do for someone that has done right by the king? Haman thinks about him, and the reversals begin. And here comes Esther's second party. How many layers and nuances are in that narrative that, first of all, you have to see what Celeste mentioned, the significance of human decisions and human actions, the role that individuals play in the vicissitudes of history. The Purim story doesn't allow us to erase names or identities and just talk about, the Persians hated the Jews, right? It's not the Nazis hated the Jews, or Nazis. We all know when you're trying to teach Holocaust studies, the number one thing to avoid is you can't do what the Nazis did, which is to reduce human beings to a number, to take away their identities, to make them just into this mass, because then it's very easy to dismiss them. In the Purim story, people are going to have names. It's going to be Achashverosh, it's going to be Vashti, and it's not going to be the Persians, it's going to be Haman. And it's not going to just be anyone, it's going to be Mordechai and Esther. And their choices will be significant. Of course, that's the famous quote. It's the turning point of the Megillah. When Mordechai turns to Esther and he says, what are you going to do? Are you going to use this moment that you have been so perfectly positioned for, that you're now the queen who, yes, we took, maybe certain things had to happen. And we see certainly that it feels like there's a divine influence behind all of this, pushing this forward, where God or HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whatever you want to say, because he's not named, will position it so that Esther is chosen as the queen. But it's not enough that she's chosen as queen. Ultimately, what's she going to do with that position is so significant, and her choices matter. Human beings, honestly, I don't want to say human beings, because there's a lot of different types of human beings. Some people really enjoy the role of leadership and some do not. Personally, there are certain areas where I feel comfortable leading and certain areas I do not. For example, I don't know how to pay taxes. I didn't say I never pay taxes. I just said I'm not good at it. I don't know W-4 form, you sign, you have to fill this out. I can't figure it out. But somebody else does have those skills. There's other things I have skills in. The Megillah asks of all of us, what is your potential? What can you do in this world? And how are you using it? And Mordechai says, listen, if it's not you, Esther, it's going to be someone. Because no one's going to stand by and allow this to happen. Maybe the consequences will be better or worse, depending, but you have a responsibility here. Okay? So certainly the Megillah is very much a Jewish story, a story about the individual working together with the hidden hand of the divine to make the world a better place, to fight back against evil. And not allowing evil, by the way, to go nameless and to go uncalled. When evil tries to hide its face behind a movement or behind a larger project or behind the masses, You locate those individuals. You name them, right? The last scene is he says, Mi hu ze ve'ezehu, right? That's the question. Who has done this? And she points to Haman and says, Haman hara hazeh. Haman, this evil person. I gotta be honest, what I find very upsetting when human beings talk about their realities is this desire to lump all human beings into these piles and these pockets. Those people, they, we, whatever it might be. It's a dangerous precedent to set because you're not actually tackling the problem. You're probably making it bigger, okay? I'll use the political example that I always use. If you're going to say the Republicans are and the Democrats are, know that it's dangerous territory. You're not doing a good thing. You're just making the pile of the problem bigger. If you say all the Democrats, all the Republicans, as Jews, we identify the individuals and we have to understand who and what is moving history and how they're using their power to do so and how we could counteract the evil that they're trying to enact in that way. Any thoughts about that, about the role of the individual and their personal identity coming to the fore? Good? Okay. The next issue, I feel like somebody does want to say something, but you're not. Use the chat if you want to talk to me, but let's move on. So one thing we have is the permanence of this story and the necessity of listening to it. What we also get from listening to it is the other message, which we just mentioned, but we have to, I think we have to mention it more emphatically. A lot of people meditate on the lack of divine intervention in the Megillah. Most readers of the Megillah, most attentive readers or inattentive readers, you talk to them and they say, wow, no, there's a pattern here. There's a path here. There is a larger hand. And the reason they say that is because of all the things we said. They're just, the inversions are too perfect. The timing is too perfect. What's it called? The dramatic iron, the irony of the punishments, the fact that Haman is hung on the same tree that he was going to hang Mordechai on. Clearly, when it's being written, the writing is being built so that any intelligent listener says, wow, there's a path and a pattern here. I do think, though, that a deeper message for us is, number one, I'm happy for somebody to argue with me on this. It is impossible for an individual living their day-to-day life in the moment to identify these big patterns in the world. It's not natural. It would be weird if you did. And I often get upset with people who try to do so. For example, the stories about, and he didn't get on the plane and the plane ended up crashing. It was God's hand. Please do not insert God's hand into reality unless you are a prophet or you're able to write the story from a bird's eye view, because you're attributing certain things to God. And that's always a little bit dangerous because we could say everything is in God's hands. But to say that we understand the reasoning and the pattern itself is extremely problematic. That one, I've always said in class, bothers me the most, because in celebrating one man's survival, what are you saying about the death and destruction of the others? I'm not comfortable. Any survival story is going to be astounding, because inherently, anyone who survived tragedy, their story is going to be, wow, it was a miracle. That's what it means to survive. It is miraculous. So the story that does make more sense overall in the larger picture is, as Jews, we have recognized through millennia that there is something weird about our survival. We've come to understand that. We're intelligent enough to say, I'm going to step back from the story. Objectively, there's a weird pattern here. So many people have tried to destroy us. It's not funny. I think it's hysterical that Purim is a funny holiday, right? That's the funniest part of Purim. We're like, ha ha ha. Remember when somebody tried to commit genocide against the Jews? Like, it's the ultimate form of Jewish humor. We've learned to laugh at our own destruction. But the truth is, the reason we're able to create a festival, a holiday about it, is because it does reach that level at a certain point as a Jew where you're like, this is crazy and it's absurd. And our survival is miraculous. And when I pull back and I look at 3,000 years of Jewish history, a part of your brain has to say, that's astounding. I see the divine covenant at work in reality. But so often that's hard to do. And so the Purim story is very inspiring because it actually says, you will not see my hand in the moments of your life. When you finish reading the Megillah, it's very clear. In the moments of reading, in the individual chapters, it is completely obscure. So it just is something for us to recognize that if you think a divine voice is going to come down from Shamayim and give you clarity of any sort in your day-to-day life, when tragedies are happening, when good things are happening, when your kid comes home from school, when you're trying to decide who to marry, when you do all of these things, these are the mysterious moments of our life that we don't have that sense of vision. The story of the Megillah is when you're going to pull back, maybe it'll take a decade, maybe it'll take a lifetime, maybe it'll take 100 years. That pattern will become very clear. It is not going to be clear in the moment. Sometimes we feel like we see it. I'm not going to deny those moments where we're like, whoa, hand of God. But most of the time we don't. And there again, we go back to the first part of the class where, given that, of course, you as a human being have to be constantly alert to opportunities, to the investment in time and energy. I don't use the word hishtadlut. Other people use that word. The reason I don't is because hishtadlut sounds like, come on, give it your effort. That's not what the Torah says. It doesn't say put some effort in. It says it's all on your shoulders, Esther. The history of mankind, here it is. What are you going to do? Your choices matter. So that's part two. Part one is human choice is important. Part two is the patterns, the large patterns of this world sometimes very clearly reveal the divine, but often in the day-to-day, impossible to see, and that we shouldn't get discouraged by that. And when Rambam is saying we'll always have Purim, it's because we are always going to have that limitation, and we're always going to have to believe in something that is not clear and present in front of us. Very challenging. Part three for me is about, I have to say, is very much, I'm going to read a quote for a minute. Let me pull this up 1 second. I want to read about this idea, which, almost is, is going to almost contradict some of what I'm saying, but not really. This idea of the role of the individual as a Jew in society and his owning of that, and not lumping people together and saying they, right? Giving yourself a name. And I want to read what Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about the Purim story for a minute. He says, in every generation, there are people whom God chooses to be his messengers, to become history makers. In the non-prophetic existence, they have to use much imagination and ingenuity to fulfill their mission. Whom does God choose? People who aren't simply individuals, but those in whom a multitude abides. Individuals who contain within them a whole nation. Their role within Israel is that of the heart among the organs of the body. The heart is affected by anxiety, joy, fear, anger, and any other stresses to the body, yet it remains the hardiest and strongest of all the organs. The individuals whom God chooses are those who see themselves affected by whatever happens to the nation, who cry with the pain of Israel and rejoice at its happy moments. Such individuals are more than single persons. They personify a whole nation within themselves. thought that was so beautiful because it sort of combines this message of you have to be your own person. You have to be Esther, right? I love my name during this house. You have to be the Esther, right? You have to own that name. But the reason why Esther and Mordechai are so powerful is because, especially Mordechai, I would say, because he has it from the outset and Esther develops it. Mordechai exists within his nation as someone who feels his role as fully to be representative of the Jewish people. Whatever has happened, and so many of us on this Zoom or who's listening to it afterwards, I know that we feel this. When we read news about Israel, it's like somebody is writing an article about either us or our sister, right? And so when we become angry and defensive and upset or excited, like we all share stories about, look how many people they vaccinated. But we also all share stories about SNL making fun of us and saying, only the Jews are getting vaccinated, right? We're so angry. And we're also so happy because we really do feel it as a whole. However, although we're so excited to share a meme and share a story or an article, because that's very easy to do, how many of us really, really, really understand the deeper messages of Purim, which is something about Purim says, go to your neighbor and give them a gift. Share a meal with them. Are you doing matanat le'evonim? Are you giving charity? Because if you're really living this way and you really, really care, then isn't Pikuach Olim always on your mind? Are you really concerned about the fact that there are Jews who might be suffering? That your brother and your sister might not have enough food to put on the table? What about your kindness to each other? What about the fact that you really hate each other most of the time? If you're embodying the message of Purim and the exemplar that Mordechai demonstrates, which is, you see Mordechai, right? That the minute that proclamation comes out, he is tearing his clothes, he goes into full mourning and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. And Esther says, change your clothes. What are you so upset about? We're going to be fine. I'm the queen. And he says, you think this is not going to touch you and your family? You think you're going to be exempt from what's happening? Wake up. You're Jewish. That's her wake-up call. And she says, let everyone fast for me. Because you know what she's really doing? She's saying, I'm not going to stand in front of the king as me. I'm going to approach him with my entire nation in like the trailing of the gown behind her. You see her carrying her nation into that royal chamber with her. You feel it in the words of the story, right? And interestingly, Rabbi Soloveitchik goes on to say, actually, this is what, when we wonder, like, what was happening for Haman, he goes on to say, look, Haman realized that Mordechai was such a person and that it would be futile to just kill Mordechai. For Mordechai is the embodiment of the nation of Israel, and the nation is the extension of Mordechai. So only the total eradication of the whole nation could erase the power of Mordechai. This is the stuff that Jewish leaders are made of. There's always this question, like, why did Mordechai bow? Like, if he would have bowed down, did he bring this upon us? Like, why couldn't he just submit to Haman? And then Haman would never have had this evil proclamation. Notice two things that are happening here. Number one, the fact that Haman is angry at Mordechai should not have entailed genocide against the Jews, A. Number two, why didn't Mordechai bow down? Do you guys ask yourself this question? Only two people's cameras are on, so I'm making a lot of eye contact with them. But if you guys want to participate, you don't have to put your camera on, but if anybody wants to weigh in, have you ever felt angry at Mordechai about not bowing down? I'm just curious. I can answer myself. You don't have to unmute yourself.
I love you.
Yeah.
I feel like the question comes up in general, like the 3 things that you're not allowed to die for, right? Like, whatever. And I'm always like, who cares if you bow down? Like, if someone is threatening to kill my child, I'm going to bow down. I'm not going to not bow down to somebody, Yeah. I know in my heart what's real. But I think it's like a domino effect. He bows down, and that's one little submission that he makes that really does stand for something else, and then you lose yourself, you lose your identity, you lose what you stand for. And whatever Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying, it's you represent more than just yourself. You represent everybody else and what the nation needs. And once you give in, you're going to lose everything else also.
I love what you're saying, and I like the tie, because I have to. Raquel is saying like Rosa Parks. By the way, just so you know, the researchers found out, and I don't know if you guys know this, the civil rights movement chose Rosa Parks. It was not a random day. It wasn't like she got on the bus and she's like, you know what, I'm not doing this today. They actually had conversations with her. She was well respected in her community. She was a churchgoer. She gave a lot of charity. Everybody loved Rosa Parks. She was really a tzaddiket. And they said, listen, we keep trying these different things, but the people are not getting behind us. If you take a stand, it will lead to something. And guess what? Rosa Parks took a stand, and because she was so well respected by her community, when she was abused because of it and punished and jailed because of it, the entire population then rose up and said, you're going to do that to Rosa Parks, right? Such a great example of what we're talking about, where the leaders came to her and they said, people look to you for leadership. How will you lead? Right? Very symbolic. And this idea that we think Mordechai was making a selfish decision, like he didn't like Haman, so he doesn't bow, so now all the Jews have to suffer. But how about if we look at it from the other angle, where he is actually responding as a Jew and saying, I cannot submit to the rise to power of Haman. He, by the way, is part of the court of the king. He knows Haman. You think Haman suddenly became this evil person capable of genocide? Haman was always capable of this. It happened in England just now. I'm sorry, I'm not good. My brain is going to, they had their election. And the Jewish leadership, for the first time in centuries, took a stand. And they said, he is an anti-Semite. We can't allow this man to rise to power. We're not going to be playing nice. We're going to fight it. Now, different people fight in different ways. And sometimes when Jews are trying to take a stand in 2021, I'm like, you're taking the wrong stand. Could you just wear a mask? Okay? It's not like, I get it. If you don't believe in masks and you're an anti-vaxxer, like, and you've been your whole life, fine. I'm not going to mess with you. But if this is about like showing people, like, I'm going to have my big wedding and not wear a mask, that's the wrong fight, people. That's not representative of what we want. But there are, I'm sorry to say, yes, there are forces in America that need to be fought, that we can't bow down to, we can't submit to, and we have to be organized around it. And this is significant to the Purim story, where you have to respond not just as an individual, but as a Jew. And it is very political for us in the modern age, because we do have to think about Israel when we're voting. We do. We can't ignore it. We can't say, well, we'll look past that policy. No, that policy affects all of us. So these things are significant and do play into our calculations. And I think every Jew I know thinks this way. The question is, are we being Esther in our execution? Esther is, like I said, it's not a hammer. It's very thoughtful. It's very subtle. It's very delicate. And she's very knowledgeable in the way she's influencing people. And sometimes I wish we had more people thinking that way in the modern age. I want to talk about one last thing here, which is, what is really Haman's problem, right? Like, where does this evil arise from? Yes, there's hatred in his heart. Yes, he's evil. I think it's very interesting that all of this for him boils down to one man not bowing down to him, right? And what does it reveal about Haman? What it reveals is what the Torah will always indicate as problematic, which is this power-hungry ego that desires submission from other human beings, right? This idea of submission. And when the Megillah starts, it's not controversial, guys, but I'm going to just say, the opening of the Megillah is actually about this power structure on a day-to-day basis in life, which is a husband, a king, calling to his queen and saying, submit to me, come to my party, do as I order. And she says, no, I don't want to come to your party, because coming to your party definitely had connotations, sexual connotations. It had immodest connotations, and it was really about putting her down. It wasn't about showing off his queen. It was about showing off his personal power, which is what all these parties were about. They were about Ahasuerus saying, look how powerful and amazing I am. And his wife says, I'm not going to play into it. And she suffers because of it. And then the proclamation comes out, and his advisors say, what if all women stop submitting to their husbands and listening to them? Guys, this is a direct quote from the Megillah. That's what they say. What if all the women start rejecting their husbands as the powerful ones in the house? We're going to have a terrible society. So you got to put out a proclamation that every woman must obey her husband. His voice is the law of the land. This is Haman. This is Ahasuerus. Submission, power, strength. Of course, the Torah thinks, the Megillah thinks that this is hysterically funny. That's why it's a funny holiday. You read it and you're belly laughing. And that's where we get to the idea, of course, ultimately, Ahasuerus is doing whatever Esther wants. Her voice is the dominant voice. She is the one writing this story down. She is the one giving Mordechai the ring, putting him in charge of things, telling people which day they're going to fight and where they're going to go. Her voice is the powerful one. But what gives her power is that actually she's not even going to demand submission. She is going to lead with humility. And her humility and vulnerability will allow for a much healthier form of governance, right? How many times that's the bell. How many times just on a day-to-day basis do we have to remind a human being that we're living with that this is not about a power struggle, and it's not about getting me to submit to your will, but it's about learning how to coexist, how to be smart, how to show vulnerability, how to be kind to one another. If we can't understand these things, says the Megillah, we're not understanding the way reality works. Because you know what? God's hand does not work indiscriminately in the story. What it does is it supports any movement in the direction against evil, against power, against submission. So when we're making decisions and we're like, is this right or is this wrong? And is it going to be supported? Are we concentrating on those goals and techniques as human beings? Are we trying to exert our power and authority? Or are we trying to be understanding? Are we trying to seek goodness? Are we being the opposite of Ahasuerus and Haman? Honestly, please think about this every day when you go shopping. What's the goal? What are you trying to buy? How are you trying to adorn yourself? When you're building a home, when you're throwing a party, when you're existing in this world, when you're talking to another human being, if you really think that you're going to get away with a lack of humility, a lack of vulnerability, and a lack of honesty, and if your goal is about showing off your strength, your power, and your ascendancy, the Megillah is here to tell you it's a joke. All the things that you think give you power, it's a farce. And that's why we dress up and we make a mockery of things on Purim, because it's not funny. It's not funny. It's hilarious that you think that these things are important. It's hilarious that you think that these things are going to get you anywhere in life. They're not. And ultimately, the patterns of this world are going to push in the direction they're going to push. Question is, are you going to push along with them or not? Now, we all like to think that evil exists somewhere else and that we are the defenders of righteousness. And that's where we go wrong. Each of us has to do soul searching on Purim. You have to be able to come ridiculous on Purim. You know what you have to do? You have to get so drunk that you don't even know the difference between Aror, Haman, and Baruch Mordechai. Why? Why do you have to get drunk on Purim? I do not, because I'm not a good drinker. But why do you have to do it? Because you got to stop thinking that you have all the answers and you got it all figured out. You don't. When when you become drunk, you know what you become? A laughing stock. That's why it's, by the way, I don't know how people get drunk because I find them, the reason I'm afraid to get drunk is because I hate that lack of control. You see a drunk person at the party, you make fun of them. They're talking to you and you're like, you think you're making sense. You sound stupid right now. They lose all their inhibitions. They lose all their ego and their sense of self. And they're rolling around. They're falling down. They're being weird. Basically, we immerse ourselves in, we're going to wear a weird hat and we're going to drink and the person you're laughing at is supposed to be you, not your neighbor. Your neighbor you're giving gifts to. The poor you're being generous with. Yourself, you stop taking yourself so seriously. All right? And in that moment, that's when you can become Esther. Because you're not the queen of Persia, honey. Honestly, you're not the queen of Persia. You are a Jewish woman positioned in a moment where you can exert your influence in a healthy way. You're not alone in the castle with your safe king. You're something more. Know who you are. Know what your responsibilities are. Humble yourself on this day. Enjoy the humiliation. Laugh at yourself. And then the next day, get ready for Pesach because it's coming. And in that moment, you're going to have to teach your children and you're going to have to own your responsibility as a Jew going into Shavuot when you're going to accept the Torah. This is the pattern of Jewish festivals. I hope there was what to learn from here. I think always on Purim, we talk about very similar themes, but I don't know that a day goes by that we don't have to talk about these things. I will have one glass of wine this holiday. I usually go right to bed after that. But I do think I have to learn to laugh at myself and my absurdities. I hope all of us have a moment of laughter about these things and about the absurdities of the world. And then we emerge ready to conquer them with authenticity, vulnerability, honesty, and a sense of our Jewish identity. Chag Sameach, enjoy, have a good time. If anybody wants to linger, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, Esther.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That's great.
Thank you.
Happy holiday, everyone.